Experience what it's like to be Batman and face off against Gotham's greatest villains. Explore every inch of Arkham Asylum and roam freely on the infamous island. Welcome to episode 46 of the 5 T's of Stealth, where we will be discussing Batman Arkham Asylum Game of the Year Edition. Once again, the 5 T's include tasks, terrain, tools, threats, and tension. These are what I consider to be the fundamentals of stealth gaming. First things first, I played Arkham Asylum on normal difficulty. The game begins with Batman capturing Joker and bringing him in to Arkham Asylum. Batman tries to stay with Joker the whole way, but once they're separated, Joker's plans begin. Long story short, Joker slowly takes over the entire island where Arkham Asylum is located, and Batman works his way through, thwarting his plans along the way. Eventually, this leads to a final confrontation with Batman defeating Joker. I'm not going to talk about every single detail here, but let's look at the highlights. Bane is one of the captives at Arkham Asylum, and one of the doctors, Dr. Young, has been draining the venom from Bane's blood. Dr. Young was hired by an outsider to create a certain drug, but it turned out to be Joker using an alias. This new drug is known as Titan, and basically creates super soldiers similar to Bane. Just some real big tanky dudes. At the end of the game, Joker injects himself with Titan and becomes just massive and overpowered, but naturally Batman is built different, so he still gets the dub. The rest of the game is basically spent uncovering this mystery of Titan, preventing its distribution into the city, or following the trail of a hostage such as Commissioner Gordon or the Warden Quincy Sharp. The main appeal in this story is who you come across while traversing the island to stop Joker's plans. We'll talk more in depth about each of these characters in the threats section, but you'll come across several Batman villains in this game, including Joker, Bane, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, Scarecrow, and Killer Croc. I do want to briefly talk about Scarecrow's impact on the story. In the greater scheme of things, it's not much, but with his fear gas, there's some serious trickery and illusions going on. When you first unknowingly come across Scarecrow, you are tracking down Commissioner Gordon, who is currently being held as a hostage. While doing so, you hear him screaming for help, and then you'll sadly come across his dead body laying against the wall. Genuinely a huge surprise, since I definitely didn't expect Gordon to be killed. As you continue, you'll head into the morgue, which then quickly shows that you're under the effects of something, as all the freezer doors start slamming like crazy. When you exit, then re-enter the room, you'll come across the bodies of Batman's parents before getting sucked into the Scarecrow boss encounter, which again we'll discuss later. When you return to the location of Commissioner Gordon's dead body, no longer under the effects of the fear gas, you'll realize that it was not actually him, but rather another random corpse. In terms of actual mission design, it's a lot of running around collecting data or items and beating up bad guys. There's also a big focus on using detective mode in order to analyze clues and follow certain tracks to find your objective. This is definitely more of a hybrid stealth game, and quite frankly, I've debated whether or not I should do a review for the 5 T's. Obviously, I have decided that I should, but there are a lot of sections in this game that cannot be stealthed. Most enemy encounters will be set up the same. Some areas will see the thugs with guns spread throughout the room, while others will see 10 enemies standing in a circle, leaving no room for stealth. This game also has a big focus on movement, considering you're Batman. So a lot of the time you'll be completing platformer-esque sections with your grappling hook or other tools, which we'll discuss later. There are also a ton of Riddler challenges, which are completely optional but provide some XP. These challenges typically involve solving a puzzle to pick up a Riddler trophy or scanning an object that matches a specific riddle. The map design almost feels like a 3D platformer, with the island of the asylum being the hub world and each individual building being a world you venture into. There are several separate areas, including the botanical gardens, intensive treatment, the Arkham Mansion, the caves, the penitentiary, the visitor center, and the medical facility. Honestly, none of these really stand out to me, and the hub world of the island also feels pretty meh. I'm not trying to say the level design is bad, I'm just saying it doesn't really do anything for me. I would say it passes for sure, but it isn't memorable. Most areas feel very familiar, with vents in the walls or in the floors, as well as gargoyles and other rails up high for you to grapple to. No matter which building you are in, the game doesn't feel all that different. I mean, sure, you will unlock new gadgets at certain points to unlock new traversal options, but that doesn't really change up the level design all that much. I will of course still give the game credit for occasionally giving the player several different options in each room, but that's usually only relevant for the stealth encounters in very limited areas. This game is very linear, and the excitement through traversal is more so for that feeling of being Batman and using his gadgets than just genuinely being intriguing areas. You get to play as Batman. For some people, that sentence alone is enough, and for others, it is an immediate turnoff. I fall in with the former. Personally, I've been pretty done with all the superhero stuff for a while, but I never tire of Batman. So, give me the opportunity to play as Batman, and I think I'll enjoy it. This game absolutely gives you the Batman fantasy with all the Bat gadgets that you can think of. One of the first upgrades you can unlock is the inverted takedown. This has to be one of my favorite things about the entire game. When atop a gargoyle, if an enemy walks underneath, you can drop down, grab them, tie a rope to their ankles, and leave them hanging from the gargoyle. The thug will start to scream for help as you watch the rest of the threats in the room run over to investigate and start panicking that Batman is here. I love it so much. Next, let's talk gadgets and upgrades. There is a slight skill tree present in this game, and you will unlock skill points after you earn a certain amount of XP. First and foremost, the iconic Batarang. This can be thrown at enemies or at buttons to activate them. There are quite a few upgrades and variations for the Batarang. There are some basic upgrades which allow it to hit harder, as well as knock out enemies longer. There's also a twin or triple Batarang, which allows you to target multiple enemies at once, but also has a cooldown. In terms of variations, there is a remote control Batarang and a sonic Batarang. The remote control Batarang is pretty self-explanatory. You throw the Batarang and then guide it. The sonic Batarang works more like bait and will attract enemies to its location. The sonic Batarang can be upgraded to the sonic shock Batarang, which can knock out enemies with the suicide collar, but as a drawback, no more sonic Batarangs can be used in that encounter after the fact. Next is the explosive gel. This can be placed on weak structures to destroy them, giving you new routes or access points. The explosive gel can be upgraded to allow selective detonation. In other words, you can place all 3 charges of the explosive gel and then blow them up one at a time instead of all 3 at the same time. It can also be upgraded to detonate when an enemy gets too close. Next, the Bat Claw, which during the story becomes the Ultra Bat Claw. This can be used to latch onto objects or enemies and pull them closer. The Ultra Bat Claw can also be used to pull down weak structures that you can't put your explosive gel on. Next, the Cryptographic Sequencer. This is where the Lockpick Adjacent tool comes into play. This tool can be used to hack panels to unlock doors or deactivate certain electronics. Using the cryptographic sequencer is extremely annoying and reminds me of the safe cracking in Splinter Cell Double Agent. You have to spin the frequency until it perfectly matches, and it's just so finicky and annoying. There are 2 upgrades for this gadget, allowing it to be used from further away and allowing it to decipher more easily. Finally, there's the Line Launcher, which can be used to rapidly traverse between 2 horizontal points. In other words, you can use it to get across hazards as long as you stay on the same level. This can't be used to move up or down, only straight across. Some gadgets have a quick activation, allowing you to use them without having them equipped. Let's talk the basics. General movement feels solid enough with a sprint, crouch, and a dodge roll. You can also climb up walls and other structures if they are low enough, as well as hang on ledges or take cover behind walls. While hanging from a ledge, you can perform a ledge takedown if an enemy is near. While in cover, you can throw a Batarang to knock down an enemy. As Batman, with all your tools, there are a couple more basic movement options that aren't necessarily basic. You have access to a grapple and can glide with your cape. While you are gliding, you can glide kick, which will have you drop down onto an enemy and of course, kick them. From what I can tell, there is no fall damage in this game, since Batman will use his cape to break his fall. There's also a map system which will guide you to where you need to go. As I briefly mentioned earlier, there is a detective mode that you will be entering a lot. This is basically your see enemies through walls ability with some extras added on top. When you enter detective vision, you will be told how many hostiles are in the room as well as how many are armed. When I say armed, I only mean guns. If an enemy has a gun, they will be outlined in red. Detective vision will also outline any doors, vents, weak structures, or grapple points within the room. As I mentioned earlier, there are basically 2 types of encounters in this game, stealth and combat. This of course means you have 2 sets of controls, stealth and combat. I already discussed the gadgets, which can mostly be used in any scenario and comes down to your creativity. Some gadgets are obviously more effective in certain scenarios, but it can be fun to just see what happens. Let's start with the combat encounters. Brawling is very simplistic in this game. Left click to punch and right click to counter. Once you've dealt enough damage to your enemies, they will fall to the ground with stars circling their heads. At this time, you can activate a ground takedown to take them out of the fight for good. However, you need to watch your timing because you can be hit and knocked out of the ground takedown. Enemies can be knocked out without the ground takedown, but it will take longer. As you deal damage, you will have a combo counter at the top of your screen. I'm not usually one to care about my high scores or whatnot, but in Arkham Asylum, your counter is more important than just a fancy number. There are a few upgrades that make your counter very important, and they are as follows. Special combo throw. Once your counter is at 8, you can grab an enemy and throw them without being interrupted. Special combo takedown. Once your counter is at 8, you can perform an uninterruptible takedown on an enemy. Lastly, special combo boost. This upgrade changes the count needed to perform special moves to 5 instead of 8. These upgrades aren't anything crazy, but they drastically change the flow of combat, making your combo counter more important than it is at first glance. There's also an upgrade that will enable critical strikes. These attacks count as 2 times the combo, but must be timed perfectly to count. Basically, you just need precise timing with your punches and you're good to go. Lastly, you can swipe your cape to briefly stun an enemy, leaving them open for an attack. There are several different enemy types that will require you to engage them differently using these simple tools, but we'll talk about that later. Now, let's talk stealth. The stealth systems in this game are very simplistic. The main gimmick here is the inverted takedown I mentioned earlier. You'll regularly find yourself perched atop a gargoyle, watching the enemy's movements and waiting for one to walk into your range. You also have access to just a regular stealth takedown when you sneak up behind an enemy. That's honestly about it. The rest comes down to how you use your gadgets. You can use the Ultra Bat Claw to pull down a wall onto an enemy, or use the Sonic Batarang to bait them underneath a gargoyle. There's one last thing I want to talk about that gets rather annoying. Whenever you want to open a vent, use the Bat Claw to move an object, or pull down a weak structure with the Ultra Bat Claw, you have to mash the open button to make it happen. This isn't the end of the world, but again, if I can just complain for a bit, it gets really old. I don't like mashing the same button over and over and over unless there's a damn good reason, and just repeatedly opening vents is not a good enough reason for me. I feel like this could be a simple button press, or maybe press and hold, and it would be much better off. Your basic enemies are the escaped convicts of Arkham Asylum. These enemies come in all forms, including barehanded, wielding baseball bats, or guns. These are the basics at least. When an enemy moves to strike you, there will be a counter indicator allowing you to avoid the hit and counterattack. During these combat encounters, enemies will continue to pick up weapons dropped by one another. In other words, just because you made one guy drop the gun, doesn't mean that gun is gone for good. Some areas will have snipers. Their line of sight can be seen by a red light, and naturally, they hit pretty hard. Some enemies will have stun batons, which really mixes up your flow. You cannot attack enemies holding stun batons head on, since you'll get shocked, and instead must dodge behind them, then attack. Some enemies have knives. In order to fight them, you need to first use the cape stun to open them up for an attack. There are some lunatics who will just run and lunge at you with no regard for their lives. Probably the most annoying enemies of the game, we have the Titan Henchmen. These are real big tanky guys who just completely ruin the flow of combat. The Titan Henchmen cannot be attacked normally, and you have to wait for them to sprint at you, then quick throw a batarang, causing them to run into a wall. At this time, you can punch them a few times. Rinse and repeat until they go down. At certain intervals, you'll also be able to get on their back and kind of swing at the other enemies, but that doesn't really feel great. It kind of just slows the pace down even more. I was genuinely irritated every time these guys showed up, since I knew the pace of the combat encounter was screwed, and I'd have to do a lot of waiting. On the bright side, these Titan Henchmen will run into the other enemies and deal some damage, so you can use that to your advantage. The Titan Henchmen will also pick up objects and throw them at you, and if I'm remembering correctly, sometimes they'll even pick up other enemies. In terms of the stealth encounters, you'll basically only come across enemies with guns. These enemies will have suicide collars or shock collars on, and knocking one out will alert the other enemies that someone has been knocked out. Enemies will react to the knocked out bodies of their allies, putting them on alert if they weren't already from the collar. Not every enemy in every encounter has the collar, so keep that in mind. I believe it only happened one time, but there were proximity bombs on the gargoyles, so every time I grappled to one, it would explode. Alright, It's time for the more exciting part. Let's talk the different boss encounters. I don't really want to say boss fights, since several of these aren't really fights. First up, let's talk Bane, and wow, what a waste of time. Bane isn't really even a boss. He's just a tutorial for the Titan henchman later on. Story-wise, Bane and his Venom are very important, but again, fighting him is a drag and no different from the Titan henchman you'll fight on several occasions. You just sit and wait for Bane to run at you, then quick throw your Batarang, then punch him for a bit. A recurring boss in the game is Scarecrow, which I enjoy, but this isn't much of a fight. When the Scarecrow encounters begin, you'll find yourself in some pretty trippy areas with a giant Scarecrow in the middle. Scarecrow will scan the area as you wait for the precise timing to run from one piece of cover to the next. Eventually, you'll find a bat signal to point at him, ending the encounter. As you return to these encounters, they will slightly change. The later encounters will include skeleton enemies you need to take down in certain segments. The last Scarecrow encounter involves the same mechanics as before, but this one ends differently. At the end, Scarecrow stares you down as waves of skeleton enemies spawn, including some giant skeletons similar to the Titan henchman. All you have to do is defeat the waves until you can point 3 bat signals at Scarecrow. Harley Quinn is very prevalent in this game, but hers is another encounter and not really boss fight. Once you track down Harley Quinn, she simply sends a bunch of her thugs at you. When you encounter these enemies, the room you are in will have 3 separate areas. Each area has the potential to have an electrified floor, so you need to pay attention and keep moving. Once you defeat all her henchmen, Harley will come out in anger and a little cutscene plays as she's quickly defeated and locked up. Let's move on to Killer Croc. Once you enter Killer Croc's lair, you'll see wooden walkways surrounded by water. If you sprint on these walkways, Killer Croc will immediately come up and it's game over. You have to move slowly while looking for the anti-venom plant spores. As you progress through his lair, Killer Croc will occasionally jump up out of the water and run at you. When he does so, you need to throw a Batarang to knock him back into the water. Other times he will simply start breaking the walkways, meaning you need to run from that area to survive. Throughout the lair, there will be several gates you have to climb over and areas you need to use the line launcher to avoid the water. Once you've collected everything you need, you'll slowly make your way back to the exit. At a certain distance from the exit, Killer Croc will pop up and start chasing you, prompting the camera angle to change to in front of Batman. You quickly run to the exit with Killer Croc hot on your heels, but Batman was prepared for this and put a big bat symbol of explosive gel at the entrance, so when you get that far, trigger the explosive gel and send Killer Croc down into the water below. Let's now talk Poison Ivy, and she adds quite a bit to the game. As the Titan sinks into the plants, they become powered up, and Ivy joins forces with Joker. Poison Ivy has the ability to mind control some enemies, giving her some minions, but they don't act any differently from the basic enemies. There are these pods scattered around the map which will open when you get too close and launch these orbs at you. You need to dodge or just throw your Batarang. The boss fight itself is pretty okay. Ivy locks herself inside a plant and launches vines at you which cover an area and will restrain you if they hit. After that, she'll start launching orbs at you and drops her protection, giving you a chance to throw a Batarang. So this whole fight is wait until she lets you hit her, then throw your Batarang until she's down for the count. It's time for the final boss, and that is of course Joker. Let me start by saying I really liked Joker throughout this game. I just love listening to the crazy shit he's always saying. He gives this insane impression, but he's quite calculating, so it's always fun not knowing what to expect and seeing what plans he has in store. No matter how much I like him as a character in this game, I still have to say that the Joker final boss fight is complete ass. Joker injects himself with Titan, then grabs Gordon and Batman and takes them up to the roof. Joker restrains Gordon to be the referee, then confronts Batman in this makeshift ring. There are 3 steps to this boss fight. Step 1. Avoid Joker as he swings at you in the ring. This is incredibly easy, and I realized I could just sprint away and he wouldn't be anywhere close. Step 2. Joker jumps out of the ring and sends in a bunch of enemies. Fight off the henchmen as Joker throws them weapons and a little mine that tracks you and explodes. Step 3. Use the Ultra Bat Claw to latch onto Joker's back and pull him down into the ring. Then you can smack him around a bit. Rinse and repeat these 3 steps until Joker's health hits 0. I hate boss fights that are just, hey, here you go, fight my minions. What a waste, man. You've got a giant Titan Joker, and all you do is have him swing his arms at the air for a bit, then call in his goons. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised, considering most boss fights are just, oh wow, it's insert Batman villain, I can't wait to fight it, followed by disappointment. Batman Arkham Asylum is definitely not a difficult game. A lot of the combat encounters are tedious, especially with the Titan henchmen. The stealth is pretty bare bones and too heavily reliant on gargoyles, and most of the boss fights are just a drag. As I mentioned earlier, the appeal here is being Batman and fighting his villains, which is absolutely what you get. However, I think my biggest takeaway from Arkham Asylum is that without the Batman IP attached, this would be an incredibly mediocre game, and with the IP, it's just barely above that. I was thoroughly disappointed throughout the entire game because my expectations were through the roof, as I had regularly heard that the Arkham games are just incredible. This does not feel anywhere near incredible. I thought the combat would be way more engaging, but a lot of the time you're just mashing punch and knocking down all the enemies. Again, the Titan henchmen make me want to scream, genuinely. I hate enemies that require you to sit and do nothing until they decide it's time to fight. Let me be clear, that is entirely different from waiting for an opening. It's one thing to learn an enemy's movement pattern and wait for the opportune time to strike. It's an entirely different thing to have zero options until the game lets you. The stealth is also pretty mediocre. I mentioned it earlier, but I absolutely love the inverted takedown where you hang an enemy from a gargoyle. This is just so incredibly satisfying and perfectly captures the feeling of being Batman for me. However, a lot of the time, the gargoyles are positioned poorly and become pretty obsolete unless you can force the enemies over towards one. There also isn't a lot of consequence for screwing up in these stealth sections. I mean, sure, you can get sprayed at and killed by all the armed henchmen, but more than likely, if you screw up, you'll just grapple to a gargoyle, then spam grapple to all the rest to break line of sight. The game tells you to do this, and it's just a little ridiculous. I mentioned in my review of The Slater how the disappointment of that game made me worry about Hitman since they were being compared in the Steam reviews. Sadly, this game leaves me in a bit of the same spot, albeit for different reasons, and it's a more direct connection. With all that said, at the end of the day, I still like Batman, and therefore, I want to like the Arkham series. However, completing Arkham Asylum has me worried that I've dedicated myself to a grind that will fail to excite me. Hopefully, as I venture deeper into the franchise, those feelings will change, because I had high expectations before I started. I think Arkham Asylum is a mediocre game that just barely comes out as a win because of the strength of the Batman IP. If you don't like Batman, then you may want to steer clear, but if you do, you really can't go wrong.